Thank you, Antonia. Everyone, welcome. Lovely to see so many people here. So Antonia's introduced me. I've had 20 years working in the NHS, which is really bizarre given that I vowed never to work in the NHS, and now feel like I'm institutionalised. It's truly a delight to see so many people on the call. I hope I don't disappoint. I want to start off by saying I'm not a trained HR or OD person. But I do have lots of experience in recruitment. And whilst I'm here to share my experiences with you, I'm also here to learn from your experiences. So I want to make this session really interactive. Put stuff in the chat. As Antonio said, we'll stop at the end of each slide. There aren't that many, thankfully. So I'll get started. So generally, we are quite poor. Oh, sorry. Do you want to share the slides on screen? Are they being shared, Antonia? I don't know if they are.
Going to be sharing in 2. There you go.
That's a bit about me. So generally, we're quite poor at self-promotion. It's not in our human nature to do that. And from my many years of experience in recruitment, I found that perhaps around 80% of applications don't really quite hit the mark. So when I was recruiting, I was always forcing myself to look for evidence in the application forms to shortlist them. And I thought, well, there's some really good stuff we can do here to improve our applications. And as I said, it's learning experience for me as well. So the reason why I volunteered for this session is so we can share effective ideas and suggestions to make our job applications impactful and hopefully secure an interview and then land the job that we want. As I said, my disclaimer is I'm merely sharing my views and experiences. If you are not shortlisted for any jobs you apply thereafter, please don't turn up at my house. And I may be stating the very obvious at times. So if you do get frustrated with me and you want to roll your eyes, take off your cameras and do it. We can have a quick 5-minute break in between. We've just gone 5 past, so perhaps about 10 to 3. We can have a quick 5-minute break. There are only 11 slides. These will be shared with you after the session, so you don't need to write furious notes. And I said we'll stop at each slide. Feel free to add comments and queries and suggestions and your own advice as well into the chats as well. Keep them brief, please. That'll help me absorb them easily. As Antonia said, there will be opportunity for Q&A at the end of the session, and I'll stay on a little while longer thereafter if anybody wants to have a chat. I also want to thank those colleagues who've suggested areas of topics for this session. And I must say, I'm quite relieved to say that almost everything suggested by you is already covered in my slides. So I'm quite relieved that's working. But if I've missed anything obvious, do let me know and we'll pick those up. Before we move to the next slide, I just want to say applications should contain facts and achievements and your successes with clear examples as evidence. But I think you should also try to bring out your personality, talk about your drive, your passion, your commitment, your desire for patient care. Also include things like your extracurricular achievements and activities, any volunteering work you've done. And this will give the recruiting manager a really good insight into your personality, your character. And we'll talk about this as we navigate through the slides. Before we start the next slide, are there any questions at this stage? Okay, thank you.
No questions.
Sorry?
No questions.
Okay, thank you. So I'm not looking at all the slides, so just let me know, Antonia, please. Do you want to move? Oh, Matthew's got a hand raised.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, this is. I'm hoping to get a lot out of this because application forms. There doesn't seem to be any sort of right or wrong way to do it. It's just a bit of hit and miss. But I know there's a trend for a lot of people to use ChatGPT at the moment. My experience with ChatGPT is that a lot of stuff that comes out is just, well, it's just a bit bizarre, really. So it'd be good to touch on that at some point.
Yeah, thank you. If I forget to touch upon that at the end of the session, please remind me and I'll do that. I've got a particular view about that. I'm a bit scared with that. My nephew applied and it came out with a lot of rubbish that come out with, and you really need to customize it for that. So I'll talk about that later on. Thank you for that, Matthew. Do you want to move to the next slide, please, Antonia? So the first slide is around preparation, right? And the fact that you're all working in these roles, you will have either an old application form somewhere or a CV, or that you've probably not updated in quite some time. But you'll also have an existing job description that might well be slightly out of date at this stage because your role will have evolved over the last few months and years. What you can do is start gathering details of your current responsibilities and your achievements, so you've got all the information at hand when a suitable vacancy arises. So and if there's an area of work you want to move into that's not directly related to your current role and background, then you need to start considering embarking on training or learning for that till you plug those gaps. So the example I'll give you is that if you want to apply for a higher banded role that requires you to have line management responsibility, for instance, start undertaking training on line management so you're ready for it, and perhaps ask your own line manager if you can supervise a junior staff member to help you develop your line management skills. So you're doing a preparation now. You don't necessarily need to wait for the vacancy to become advertised. And your achievements, so your roles and responsibilities may well be standard to some degree, but your achievements will be your unique selling point. We will talk a bit more about USP later. So perhaps even on a weekly basis in your personal records, you should start recording in your personal files your achievements, what you feel your big achievement was in that particular week or that day. We do some absolutely amazing things at work, but we just don't seem to recognize them as achievements because they're part of a regular work and is expected of us. But other people might think that's absolutely amazing, so do start recording those. So I might be stating the obvious here, but if the deadline is 2 weeks away, and often a lot of these jobs are advertised for a 2-week period, we shouldn't really wait until the last few days to fill the application because it will need to be refined, refreshed, reviewed, and you'll need to revisit a few times to just get the final touches in. You might uncover spelling and grammatical mistakes. You'll start thinking about new things. So as soon as you see the vacancy, start the ball rolling, but you'll have a framework which you can use that you've gathering all the evidence. This is part of your preparation. For those people who, I think, given what Antonio said, a lot of people apply through NHS jobs process, the track website. You can set notifications up to give you prompts when a suitable vacancy arises. The problem with that, however, is that the job titles might be quite generic, so you might need to expand your search criteria and put specific words into the search so it gives you details from the job advert as well as the person spec. So, and if you see a job that appeals to you, ask yourself if that role that's been offered to you, is it suited to your background and aspirations? And there may well be gaps in your skills, your experiences, your knowledge, and especially if you want to apply for a promotion or move to a different area of work. So you start thinking about those things. But to plug these gaps, you can do a number of things. You can embark on relevant training courses. You can see from a job description, person spec, where the gaps are from experiences and background. You can embark on training, perhaps attend high-level meetings with your line manager or their line manager to get some exposure. You can do job shadowing in the field of work that interests you. You can try to spend some time working on a different project or program, undertake academic learning. Even people who tend to apply for promotions, often they do it through once they've had exposure at secondment at high level. But you can also kind of enhance your marketability by developing your skills and experience outside of work with family, with volunteering, and any relevant work in the community. But what you can also do, really important. So what I'll do is I'll look at the chat after the slide, if that's okay. What you can also do is, this I think is really important, which is on the next slide, is speak to the recruiting manager. Your informal conversation with that person will really give you a good understanding of the role, and also give you a really good idea of that person's personality to really assess if you can work with them, build a rapport, start work, have a good working relationship with them. And obviously research the employer, the team. You might already be working in NHS, NHS England. You can probably reach out to people in that particular team to learn more about them, what the role offers and what the construct of the team's like, what the dynamics are like. And I don't know if people have also, I don't know if people have used Glassdoor. For those people who haven't, you can research on it, and you can research what it's like to work for that particular employer. It's like doing your due diligence. So people who've worked for a particular employer or currently working for them, they give their honest views in an anonymous fashion. So do avail yourself to that. So I'm going to pause there for any questions before we move to the next slide, and then I'll try and address some of the questions in the chat.
Got a question in the chat, Zai. Someone wants to know how much employment history should they provide on a CV?
So what I would do is avoid repetition. So if you're doing a similar job in two different employees or two different teams, you don't necessarily need to duplicate the message. What you can do is really, really highlight, and I'll talk about this later, you highlight the roles and responsibilities, what they want to see. Recruiting managers want to see not only what you've done in that job, but what you've achieved. So talk about your achievements. And just because you might have done something 7-8 years ago, if that is relevant, let's say, I'll use an example. Let's say you use Excel in an advanced Excel skills 7-8 years ago, and you've not used it for 7-8 years, and the new job requires that. All you do is accentuate those skills and highlight and promote those. I've done Visual Basic Programming of Excel, and here's an example of where I used it, and this is the outcome I delivered, and keep it short and succinct. What I've always said to people, try to accentuate and promote the things that are needed for the role, whether you've done it in your current job or did it 20 years ago. The fact is you're capable of doing it. Hopefully that answered the question.
Thank you, Zahir.
Okay. So somebody said that track allows for a maximum of 10 previous teams. What you can do, and I've done this as well, because again, I've worked for many employers before I started working in NHS. Excuse me, I've actually put in the supporting information section, I just put additional employment, and I just put bullets, date from that date to that date. Excuse me, that's the employer, and that was my role. Just one line for each one. And because you have to demonstrate where there are gaps in employment, so that's obviously not get picked up. And it doesn't necessarily need to be 20 years behind. You might have done something 3 years ago that might not be relevant for the role for which you're applying. So just put it in there in additional information, or in, if you're running out of space for the 10 maximum teams, just put it in additional information, because it's not really relevant. It might not be relevant for that team. Okay. Oh, brilliant. Thank you for sharing the track website. So hopefully those answer those questions. Do you want to move to the next slide? Oh, Matthew, you've got a question?
Yeah, just a quick question. So you can put in 10 roles into your previous job experience. So let's say out of this 10, only 5 are relevant. Would you literally just put the 5 in? There would be a gap possibly in some years, and then in the supporting information, you'd list them out there. Is that what
Yes.
you'd kind of? So you only put the stuff that's relevant to that job into your previous career history?
No, what I would do is I'd maximize the space that's available in the employment history. But if you run out of space, then I'd put the additional lines in the in the supporting information.
Okay, but what if a job isn't wholly relevant? Would you just leave it quite brief, just a couple of sentences?
Oh, absolutely.
Okay.
I'd keep it concise, because again, they're looking at evidence to see to what extent your application matches to the role. But you'll be amazed that you might not think the work that you've done is really relevant. But things like you might have done some volunteering work, organising an event for a community centre. But the planning around that is a really big thing, and the skills you will have developed. So again, not only what job you've done and the role that you've undertaken, but what you've achieved, what is your kind of successes from that. That's what they want to see. So absolutely, you accentuate the skills and knowledge and experiences that are relevant for the job. But there might be things that you've put on there that you think, "Oh, actually, that's not really relevant." But you know what? You'll be amazed how it all kind of links in. But yeah, absolutely, keep it brief if you feel it's really not relevant. And I've gone back 20 years, and I've still put stuff down. I've been working in the NHS 20 years, but prior to that, I've still put stuff down where I worked for O2 and I've been national at the time, and what my role involved. What we shouldn't do is have gaps because they'll start unpicking that. So that's why I put extra lines in the supporting information section. Hopefully that's helpful. Do you want to move to the next slide, please? Thank you. So the reason why I said contact the recruiting manager is that sometimes the job descriptions and person spec, they're kind of written in a really broad sense. Because the moment anyone makes changes to the job description and person spec, it has to go through another desktop job evaluation exercise where it might get regraded if you change it. So it's quite strict, and some are written in a generic fashion, so it's really difficult to understand what the job is. So to get a good understanding for that, you can review the job advert, which kind of summarizes the job requirements. But I think you'll elicit far more context and understanding by contacting the recruiting manager. So these are some of the questions. You can scan down those. These are those that I've reached out to the recruiting manager in the past, learn more about what, how the vacancy came along, or what the objective for the role, what the challenges they're facing. It's really important to understand what the culture of the team is and the management style, how they operate, what the things they enjoy, what they find frustrating. Remote working options are a big one. We'll talk about that further as well, because you could apply for a job in 80 miles away, but they might still allow you to work in an office close to your home. So, and periodically visit the team. And we're doing that in my team at the moment. It's important to be polite and courteous, thank them for the time, because, you can spend 45 minutes, an hour talking about that. And I always say this, I always wish them the best for the recruitment. And being, kind of being yourself in that informal setting will give the recruiting manager a really good idea of your own personality. And we know interviews are the kind of artificial environments. You have to create a persona to fulfill the obligations of the interview, and you're not really being your true self in that scenario. So it's really important to try to get as much information from them. The information that you glean from those conversations, you'll be amazed that you can incorporate those into the application process, and that will give you your competitive edge. Now, somebody said just here that they didn't want to answer most of the questions. As I said, questions form part of the interview. I mean, I think that's poor, in my view, on behalf of the recruiting team. That speaks volumes for me because they're not being transparent. I mean, there are some people that I've not experienced it, but there's some people that actually share the interview questions with all candidates half an hour before the interview. So they're not there to trip people up. They're just to make sure we get the best candidate on the day. And they go to that extent. So the fact that they've got the contact details on the job advert, contact us for any queries, and you're contacting them and you're talking about, they're all learning more about how the vacancy arose and learning more about the culture and stuff. I don't think that's controversial. We're not asking them to share with us the questions beforehand. So I think, that's a red flag for me. I've not experienced that myself. I've been really transparent with the people who've applied in my team because I want to get the best out of people and I want them to be the true selves as much as possible. So I always urge you to speak with the recruiting manager. If they're not willing to sort of disclose any information, then that's a red flag for me. But I would always try to reach out to them. And they may have, just by reaching out, they may have kind of appreciated your kind of polite personality. Yeah, there we go, Jocelyn. And you may feel you'd be a good fit with the team, and that could make the difference. They could say, that person. There's two people that are quite close to the wire, and the person who rang up and inquired about the job, I built a rapport with them. And in fact, the job I secured at HE, there were 48 applicants in total, and I was the only one who came to the office to speak to the recruiting manager. One other person rang up, but I was the only one who came to speak to the recruiting manager. And I had a good hour conversation with them. And I kid you not, the things we talked about, I weaved a lot of that stuff into the interview, as well as the job application form. And that was my competitive edge against other people. So do definitely reach out to people. Yeah, absolutely. If people are not willing to engage with you on that basis, then it speaks volumes for me as well. I wonder how they operate in that environment. So I'll stop there for any other questions. Okay, good. Can we move to the next slide, please? So again, I'm going to be stating the obvious here, so I apologize for that. But your application forms, they will contain mandatory sections. And as I said before, whilst you can state your roles and responsibilities of the job that you did, your unique selling point will be your achievements and successes in that role. Because as an example, let's say there's a senior project manager job, and 5 project managers applied for that job, and the job description is pretty much the same. And so you've literally lifted and dropped it from a job profile into that. The recruiting manager will see 5 identical applications. How you draw your distinction is identifying and highlighting what your achievements and successes were. And that's really important for me. And we'll talk about how we can give clear examples. We'll talk about give facts. Obviously, people write stuff like, I'm an excellent team player and stuff like that. We'll talk about that later on. Do put teasers into the application to keep the reader intrigued, and they'll delve into your list of achievements and your unique selling points later on, either at interview. The example I'll give you is when I was at O2 many years ago, I programmed Excel VBA, Visual Basic for applications. Again, try to be careful not to use too many acronyms they might not be familiar with. Visual Basic for applications, and I automated the programs where I reduced reporting times from 3 days down to 2 hours. And far from making myself redundant in the process, I assumed more responsibility that was of an analytical and investigative nature. I put that code on other team members' desktops as well, so they used it as well. So I found that. So try to be that. So be as concise as possible. One thing I want to say, in just one generation, I'm really old, might not look it, but just in one generation, we've moved from reading large quality newspapers to TikToking and Instagramming and YouTubing, and our attention span has really condensed. And so we need immediate information at our fingertips. Just imagine, we've all done it. I'm culpable. We scroll through social media and it takes a second to decide whether they're going to watch that clip or not. And then move to the next one and I'll scroll through that. And we're at that stage now. So we need the information right at the fingertips. That's why we have to give very, very clear and concise examples when presenting the evidence. So I'll talk about later on the CAR model. We talked about the give a few needles and not the haystack. So I'll talk about the CAR and STAR model: the challenge, action, result, and situation, task, action, result, essentially the same thing. So your unique selling point, which we'll talk about in a minute, is your competitive edge over the applicants. So ask yourself, if I'm trying to promote and market myself, what is my unique selling point? And hopefully you'll have already contacted the recruiting manager and they will have, had a conversation with you and you learn more about the role. And you can include a lot of that stuff in the application from any of the information you've received from them. And you may have already worked on a similar project or a role in the past to the one for which you're applying. You may be using, Microsoft Excel, using programming to automate steps. That improves accuracy and speed. Or you may be able to offer new ideas to the role itself around benefits management. You may be trained in, portfolio management systems where you've delivered training for new users of the system. So think about what your unique selling point is. And again, how you get that is through your achievements you note down on a weekly basis, and you build up your kind of your profile of not only what your job description says, but what you've achieved each week, and that builds your unique selling points on that basis. So we'll talk about powerful words. I'm just going to read some of the questions, comments here. Just bear with me. Yeah, I agree with that, Mina. Yeah, there are people, again, lack of transparency. The thing with applying for jobs, it's almost an illusion that it's a one-way system, but it's also an opportunity for you to decide, well, whether I want to work for that team or that company or that employer or not. And so just there have been times when I've been offered a job and I've declined it. So you get good sense of whether you want to work for that team. That's why it's really important to reach out to as many people as you can about the role. If you know people who work in the team, just reach out and say, look, what's it like working there? I want to speak to that person. And if you're working in that environment, you usually have an idea. If you know the people, the environment's quite small, you might have had engagement or interactions with the recruiting manager. Well, actually, I like working with that person. They're quite forthcoming, they're open, they're transparent, they're polite, respectful. I won't mind working for them. So it depends. You do get people like that, unfortunately. And where we've got high turnover, that's a red flag as well, which is why when you ask the question about how did the vacancy become available, as well, the person left after 3 months of the job, well, that's a red flag for me as well. It's really important to tease that out. So I'm just reading the question if you don't get good as well. I agree. Jocelyn, yeah, reach out to other people as much as possible. You're galvanizing as much intelligence as possible to make a really important decision that impacts on your career and your personal life. Absolutely, you're fully entitled to do that. You're not breaking any laws by doing that. Now, lack of public structures and transparent about teams, of course, I accept that, which is why, hopefully, if it's a good team, what they should do is in the job advert, they should have, particularly if it's internal, but the job description itself, there should be a box where they put the team structure in there, so you can look at the hierarchy and the dynamics for that. I'll answer the bit about the 1,500 words in a bit, please, if that's okay, because I'll touch upon that in a second, because I've got a special point about that. So thank you. Any questions on that particular slide before I move to the next one? Helen, what's the last word? Is it blameless or baseless? I don't know.
The nameless. If structures are in there, it normally just gives you the roles within that team. It's really hard.
Yeah, sometimes you won't get the names of the individuals. I think some people do advertise. They put the names of the individuals and the job titles in the structures. Others don't. But again, hope that doesn't put people off. I'd actively encourage you to reach out as much as possible to the recruiting manager, because there might be 3 people on an interview panel, and I when I applied for a role, the person I'd be reporting to wasn't the contact name on the job advert, and the person I reached out to, they were quite open. I was quite engaged with them. But when I went for the interview, and I found out how I don't like to use the word, he was soulless, completely soulless, and I thought, I don't want to work for this guy. Within 30 seconds, I made the decision. Thankfully, I didn't get the job. But I thought if I was offered the job, because there was a promotion, I might have accepted it, and then I would have stuck. And so there's a lot to learn. So reach out to as many people as you can. Read about also, any for that team, any word that they've done, any policies they've written, strategies they've implemented, and you learn a lot about just that as well. So yeah, thank you. Any other questions?
We've got Helen. Want to unmute yourself?
Yeah, on that last point, it's really hard to find out anything else about the team. You get a link, to like generic NHS stuff on websites, but to find anything out about the teams, about what they're delivering, what their roadmap is, it seems to be all shut down. There's just not enough. And I know we're mid-migration in NHS England, between the England tenant and the NHS tenant. And yes, there's futures, but even futures doesn't seem to give you enough information to be able to look at the team.
So
and when you're applying for bands, personally, when you're applying for bands 7 and above, there should be access to information that you can go out and show, that you can go and research that team and find out more about, but it just seems very difficult to be able to use those skills that you've got to find out more. And it shouldn't be this hard. I came to the national team from NHSX, and it was quite easy to find out about what teams were doing in NHSX, but there's nothing of a similar platform, because I don't even think Futures does that for us at a national level. So it's really hard.
It is. So firstly, the job advert itself, hopefully they'll have tailored that to the role itself. So you should have a little bit of an idea what the role requires. Unfortunately, a lot of job descriptions, they are written in a generic fashion. So it can be difficult to ascertain what the demands of the role are, and also whether it's suited to your background or your aspirations. So what that would mean for me, even if I was desperate to apply for a promotion or another role, again, that's a red flag for me as well. If they're not being transparent enough about the role, how are they going to attract the best, most skilled and trained person for that role? And what that might mean is that they're not attracting the right caliber of candidates, and then their potential could end up with people with the wrong skill sets and wrong training backgrounds in that role, and then as a team they won't be delivering. So, and we can see for those people who are on the call that work for NHS England, there's a lot of movement at the moment because people have been slotted into roles through this transition process, and this aligned to roles that are not suited to their background or skills or their aspirations. And then that's why there's a lot of churn. I mean, for one vacancy internally, about 25, 30 people are applying. So I fully accept that. But like I said, if you are uncertain about what the demands of the job are, if you've read the job description, person spec, you've read the job advert, you've reached out to teams or the recruiting manager, and you feel actually I'm not any wiser to it, that's a red flag, and I wouldn't apply for it because I need to make sure it's the right job for me. What I don't want to do is leave 6-8 months down the line, and that would leave a blemish in the application when you apply again for another role. Why have you left 6 months down the line? And it won't be a reflection on you as an individual. It's around the team itself and how it functions. Band 7 above is very challenging. Yeah, I accept that. And there's things we can do about getting trained up. There's links at the end of this session, at the end of the full slide set, around what we can do in terms of bolstering our skills and experiences and knowledge, and how it can market itself more as well. And it can be quite high compared to the agencies. Yeah, I accept that. Again, we've got with the new agenda for change rules, I think at band 8, I'm not sure about 9, but band 8 level, they're going to be what they call step point increases in between. Normally, it was you wait 5 years before you get any increase. Now they make it stepped, so it'll attract people. Because I thought, well, if I would apply for a band 8B job, I have to wait 5 years before I get to see a real increase. The adverts in that much slower. Yeah, accept, Lynn, accept that as well. It's difficult, and so what we need to do is, particularly for people who apply for promotions, think about, well, okay, here's a job description and the person spec, and this is what I do. If I want to get to that role, how do I then plug those gaps? What are the things I need to do? And I touched upon it earlier. I'll talk about it again as well. Shall we? Oh, really? I didn't know that. That's unsettling to know. Shall we move to the next slide, please? Powerful words. I've lost my cursor. So I'm not going to go through every word there, but I just wanted to share some action words that we can consider when applying for jobs. And I said at the start, we're not, as human beings, we're not really hardwired to market ourselves particularly well. We're not all Muhammad Ali who said we're the greatest. It's not our human nature to do that. I'll give you an example. One of my friends, he's got a PhD and 2 masters, and he works as a regulatory scientist for the health and safety executive, and his role is to assess the kind of the toxicity levels of new pesticides or bleaches or whatever it is that come into the market. And and he would write in his job applications, absolutely, Doris, we will be sharing the slides after the session, absolutely. He would write in his application, I assisted, I supported, I worked with, I helped. I thought, despite the fact that the assessments he undertook for the health and safety executive, it resulted in the change in EU-wide legislation. I said, I find it staggering that, we don't market ourselves. So use some really powerful words, implement it and, strategize and produce the policies and implement it and all that kind of stuff. Try to use some of these words or other variations of it, but don't undersell people who assisted and supported, helped. The things we do is absolutely magical from other people's perspective, but we don't appreciate it because it's part of our regular work. So absolutely do review the language you use when you're writing applications and don't undersell yourselves. I'll stop there for any other questions on that one. Oh, brilliant. Can you move to the next slide, please? So some colleagues, as part of the feedback, they said, can you talk a bit more about the shortlisting process and criteria? So it's really good to know that, I'm doing the right things. I had already planned for this. So that's raised by colleagues. It's brilliant. Now, people are talking about CVs and personal statements and also supporting information sections in job applications and how we get the balance between them. So in terms of shortlisting, again, this is my experience. I don't know how other people have felt about this, but I can say with a relatively high degree of confidence that the recruiting panel members should scrutinize all sections of the job application to look for the evidence, and they'll score applicants based on the strength of the evidence provided, whether it's in the supporting information bit or whether it's in the employment history or training or whatever it is, education. But again, it's learning how to write it in a succinct fashion. That's the important thing. So you're drawing out the bits that they want to talk about. So again, how we get the reader's attention to the bits we want them to read. So what you see on the screen here is a scale that is often used for shortlisting, 0 to 3. And this is a broad criteria, but essentially covers it all, So I'll give you an example. When I worked at the primary care trust many years ago, I advertised for the Band 5 job and actually recruited somebody who had zero direct experience into the Band 5 because she filled in the application very well. There were no grammatical mistakes. It was structured really well. Even though she had no direct experience in performance analysis and reporting methodologies, the fact that she was able to explain it all, what it meant, and the purpose of how it can be applied and under which conditions, all that kind of stuff. She showed a determination of delivering her role. I shortlisted her for interview, and even at interview, she really excelled. She was competing against long established and experienced analysts, and she passed the relative, I think I wouldn't call it advanced, but intermediate Excel test, and performed really well interview. She really exuded confidence and commitment. So I recruited her into my team, and she did really well. Now she's a band 7 for an ICB. So she was competing with people. She was literally, when you look at the applications, they think, right, here's a person who got zero experience, here's a bunch of people who got a lot of experience. And in the end, I recruited that person. So what I'm trying to get to is, when you complete an application forms, we have to ensure we exceed the criteria in the person spec, even if you don't have any direct experience. And I'll talk about how we structure the supporting information bit. So you got your person specification, you'll have, communication skills, analytical judgmental skills, similar to the factors in the job evaluation handbook. How do we do that? So firstly, you might have embarked on formal training in that particular area to help you develop your knowledge. So let's say the role requires somebody with project management experience, but you don't have any. What you can do, and I've done this, what you can do is you can emphasize that whilst you don't have any direct experience managing projects, you might have worked in a team and supported people in I don't mean this in a disparaging fashion, but in a lesser capacity. You are familiar with the project management methodologies. You can talk about PIDs and being clear about the scope of the projects and understanding, having the benefits in mind and outcomes in mind first and work your way back and be clear about the deadlines and milestones, employing resources like finance and material staffing, understanding how we score risks and how to mitigate those, how we raise issues and produce escalation reports, how engagement with stakeholders with different disciplines, different needs, and at the end evaluate whether the success criteria has been met, do a review, get feedback, and all. So you talk about all that stuff, and you can say, whilst I may not have had any direct experience, these are the things I know about project management, and in this role, I'd apply these skills to deliver this bit on the role. So I don't have the specific job description in front of me, but I would apply on that basis. So you can say, actually, you'll get good scoring for that because you've demonstrated your knowledge about, even though you might not have delivered it. In fact, you can talk about, well, okay, you might have, I think as a minimum, I've attended APM project management fundamentals. As a minimum, you could talk about the principles around that as well. And say, look, I'm willing to embark on additional training to bolster my knowledge base around that. There's no harm in doing that all. In fact, when I was recruited for HE 11 years ago, I was recruited to project manage the procurement and implementation of a national performance reporting solution. I had no direct experience in managing projects. I was familiar with performance reporting. That was my subject matter expertise. And I explained the concepts of project management. And had I not done so, I might not have secured the role. I was really fortunate to get that. So what I'm trying to say is, when you fill the supporting information up, I'm assuming personal statement, supporting information is used the term interchangeably, but the supporting information bit, give an example against each criterion that's relevant in the person spec. So we'll talk about how we structure that later on, and score yourself. Using the shortlisting criteria, and ask yourself where there are gaps. As I said, we'll talk about methodologies and principles, how you'd apply them. Think about scenario-based questions and answers. Give an example. They might say, well, they won't say this on the application one, but when you get to interview, they'll like to be scenario-based ones. Can you give me an example when you did this and this, or what would you do in this instance? So in the application form, they're looking at specific examples. Talk about, the things you've achieved. You might have saved money. You might have delivered a project within time. You might have improved the quality, the reputation. You might have saved the organisation money, and all kind of stuff. A lot of things you can do. What were your achievements? We will have listed. We'll pick these things up. I can use those as evidence against each criterion. What I'm also going to say is that, we could, you could ask your line manager whether you can participate on any recruitment processes within the team or other people. Just, make yourself available. So look, I want to just, for my own knowledge base, I want to get better understanding how the recruitment process works. And, so I want to get involved in recruitment and shortlisting, just as an observer. That includes being on the interview panel. And so you get an idea what it's like to sit on the side of the table. So definitely do that. So in every instance, you should be aiming for, at least 2, at best 3. So you meet the criteria or exceed the criteria, because you will be scored on that basis. So if you've got a poor example, do away with that and use a different example. Again, it doesn't necessarily need to be one about at work. It could be in a personal life, or in another capacity. The thing is, as long as you've got the credentials to do the job. So think about a really, really specific example. I'm going to touch upon the CAR model in a bit, about challenge, action, result later on. So you use a very, very specific example as evidence. Again, that would be your unique selling point, your competitive edge compared to other people. So there are no other questions in the chat. Are there any other questions on the shortlisting criteria before we pause for just 5 minutes and I can have a glass of water? Oh, Matthew.
Yeah, hello. Thank you. Often adverts have a bit of a description about the role and then some of the criteria, and then they refer to the JD and there's a person spec. Now, often there could be like 10, 20, 30, 40 criteria within that. Do you have any sort of thoughts in terms of how do you narrow down which ones you should evidence for and which ones are most important?
Well, you're right. Absolutely legitimate thing. What for me, I have something called the 80-20 rule, where you spend 20% of your time occupying 80% of the answers. So the way I explain it is that there will be stuff in the job description that are then just as a rule, things like, well, must be able to work under stress, right? Sorry, that's a bad example. Or mental effort or emotional effort and stuff like that. So actually, I don't need to spend a lot of time doing that, because the example I'm going to give kind of covers the emotional effort. I might be imparting bad news to a senior, to my SRO, for instance, that we're not delivering on a project because these things have happened. But you, from the job advert, you'll have a really good idea, I'm hoping, what the requirements of the job are. So in a broad sense, the job description, they'll start off with essential criteria. That's priority number 1. It's absolutely essential. You need to have that covered off. Then the desirable criteria, if you've got room for that, build that in as well. The job description will tells you what the requirements of the job is, and what they'll do at the start of it, of the job description, before it goes into detail, it gives you like a quick summary of the job profile or the job purpose. You can gauge from that what the demands of the job are, and then you can focus on those. So the standard. So thinking about, if you apply for a senior project manager role, well, actually, having a really good insight to delivering projects is a really good one. Communicating, engaging with stakeholders, managing conflicting deadlines, planning and organising, all these kind of things are broad. And there will be some stuff in the periphery that might not be directly relevant than what happens. So I'm just reading Jane's query. So I would, if, again, we've got 1,500 words, and the art of writing, and I'll talk about this again later. Thank you for reminding me, Matthew. But the art of writing is writing things concisely, because how we write our application form, if we write it in a concise fashion, it'll draw people's attention directly to it. Thinking about what I said about I was TikToking and YouTubing, we want information directly, so you can keep it succinct, give a short, quick answer to the questions. So hopefully you'll cover all the essential criteria, as Jay mentioned. Sometimes, if they deem it essential, then we need to think about how we can fill those individual criteria, give an example for each one. Now, this thing about supporting information, again, we've got 1,500 words. Hopefully, you'll have enough space to give evidence for that. And if they've said absolutely everything is essential, some people absolutely remarkable. They've got 4 or 5 things essential, and there's nothing undesirable, and you've got the rest of the documents blank. So it depends. Of course, Jane, you might have come across where the job description person specs are far more detailed and embellished. That might be a good thing, but you need to tease out from that, from what you said about the job description at the start of the job profile, the job profile and the job advert. And again, you can reach out to the recruiting manager to learn more about that. And I think, honestly, I'm hoping the poor experiences people had with recruiting manager not being forthcoming, that's an exception rather than the rule, because that hasn't been my experience with that. So the thing about writing the supporting information bit, which we'll get onto, is how you write that and structure that will kind of give an indication to the recruiting manager how you communicate in a written format. Because if you can get your message across, let's say in 1,000 words instead of 1,500 words, and as long as you've ticked off all the boxes, brilliant. So, and also, well, I'll tell you what, I'll talk about it after the 5-minute break. Can I just check? Are there any other questions? And Matthew, did I answer your question?
I think so. You'll probably cover more of it in the next session in terms of how to actually write it as well. So that'd be great.
Okay.
Thank you.
We'll do that.
I think Jane had a hand up.
Sorry, Jane, I missed it.
No, I took it down because I think you probably it was about how to write it. So I think you're probably coming onto it.
Well,
Okay.
the reason why I said we'll do it after a 5-minute break, you'll be hopefully a bit more refreshed by then. And so, yeah, it's some golden nuggets coming this afternoon. So I'll be back online at 3 o'clock. Is that okay if everyone's catch up at 3?
Yeah, let's make a start.
Okay. So the reason why I asked for a quick 5-minute break, because this might go into a bit more detail, and I think this is probably the most important section for us to evidence our key achievements, our unique selling points, and our successes. And it kind of is an opportunity for us to showcase our own individuality. I spoke earlier about writing generic job roles and responsibilities, but that does not bring out your uniqueness. And recruiting managers, they won't spend more than a few minutes shortlisting. So it's really important that this section in particular has to be impactful and as concise as possible. Doesn't need to be really condensed, but as I said, even though we've got 1,500 words, you can get your message across with fewer words, absolutely fine. It's absolutely essential to break up the sections, create headings, subheadings, and I would strongly advise that we structure the supporting information in the same order as the person spec. So if it asks for communication or project management knowledge, analytical judgmental skills, write it in the order. It's really important we do that. But before we get to that at the start, I always do this. Just bear with me a second. I always do this at the start, and I ask people to do this at the start. So why do you want to work for that employer or that team, and what appeals to you? What appeals to you about that role? And then go into the detail about providing evidence. So for each essential criterion, give a specific example. And I've got some do's and don'ts after this as well, so I'll talk about that in a moment. And when you're looking for examples, do think about what the ask is in the job advert. But do talk about, I said, your unique selling points. Talk about your passion for working in NHS and improving patient care. And the thing is, ask. So in a project management role, think about how your role might impact the frontline services, because ultimately that's what we're there for. So you might have worked as a project or program manager or in a different capacity. One example is the new medical doctor degree apprenticeship program. So that's been introduced this year, I think. So the outcome for that is, more people entering doctor's training with flexible entry routes. Excuse me. And then they'll end up into recruitment. They'll be working on the frontline services, they'll be treating patients, and then ultimately help improve patient care. So you can see how that translates into the work that you do. How does that then translate into the bottom line? What I also say is that, do write your supporting information section in Microsoft Word first, and then until it's absolutely final, then paste it over into the application form. Now, I don't know, and apologies, I've been a bit absent from the process recently, but I think the new application forms, they break up the person spec sections to include essential and desirable, and you're required to provide, provide evidence and content for both. But even if you do not have any of the desirable criteria, as I said earlier, you can explain the principle, the purpose, and how you would do things if you were to embark on that role. And we can talk about that. So, and the reason, one of the main reasons why I think this is the most important section I touched upon earlier, is that how you convey your message in this section will provide really clear evidence to the recruiting manager how you communicate, how you will communicate in that role, whether that's writing reports, delivering presentations, communicating via email. And if this is unclear, it's not direct, the reader's looking for information in a lot of text, that can be a bit off-putting. So that's why it needs to be really clear, as concise as possible, free from grammatical mistakes or errors or inconsistencies. We'll do that. And so I said earlier that do talk about your passion, your keenness for the role, because that's really key for a lot of people. And again, use examples from outside of work if you need to do that. Before I move to the next slide on do's and don'ts on the supporting information application section, are there any other questions on this section, on this slide?
Yeah, so in terms of talking about those headings and the subheadings, you have desirable, then you've got the the essential criteria, because there's often, like, I don't know, in the first part, like 10 bits, it talks about, let's say it's project management, your experience of project management, experience of healthcare. Would you then have just one heading for that whole bunch, or would you have healthcare experience, project management experience? Like, what level of detail do you kind of go into your headings?
So I'd start off at the top with a broad heading. Let's say, so look at, as an example, project management experience. So if there are no subheadings in there, you can just write on that, simple as that, on that basis. But under project management, I don't know, one example, under project management, forgive me, I'm not expert in this, but let's say under project management, you can write, one might be producing policies or stakeholder engagement as a good example. And somewhere else underneath that, you might have benefits management. Well, actually, if there are that many subheadings, then you could probably give an example for each one. I'd give an example for each one. So that way, when you're reading it across, so think of it as a reader, as a recruiting, if you were recruiting and they've got, again, the shortlisting criteria, as when they shortlist, they will have in the same order. And then all they're going to do is read across, right? That's what we wanted. That's what they said they've got. That's what they wanted. Everybody just reads across it rather than trawling through application page after page, back and forth, trying to force themselves to find the evidence. Whereas it's directly there in front in the right order. So if you've not got too many subheadings, I'd break it down to that level, stakeholder engagement. Because, if it's a project management, you have to have stakeholder engagement. So you can say, I've done this. But if you spell it out for them, I've done stakeholder engagement. Here's an example. The idea is to keep it as concise as possible. And that way you've ticked off all the criteria. I've got that, here's my example. I've got that, here's my example. I've got that, here's my example. And you've been through it. So it depends how much detail there is in the person spec. If there isn't a lot, then I'd go have the headings, subheadings. if there's a lot of detail, you think, well, okay, I have to make a decision now which one are the most important ones, and I'll focus on those, and the less urgent ones or less important, like there might be the desirable ones, or things like, I don't know, physical effort, for instance, that might be one of, actually, that's not really that essential, so I'll disregard that. So thinking about, and then have that in order. And to answer your question, Helen, personally, I would not remove the headings, because that will make the reader understand. Just like, so think about a BBC News article. You log in on BBC News / bbc.co.uk/news. You've got straight to the front page, you've got a headline, you've got a picture. Obviously, you won't put pictures in the supporting information, but you've got 2 or 3 lines. And then you click on to read more, and you've got other the full article in more detail with some subheadings and stats and stuff, and in the periphery you'll have all the related information to that particular article you're reading. So just by one hop, the reader has gone away fully informed about that area. And the way it's structured is absolutely essential, in my view, to have the headings in there so the reader can understand what for which section you're giving evidence. Then they will have to trawl through it. That's my firm view on that. Again, the thing with this is the thing with advice is it can get disregarded. Everyone has their own style. I'm here to, even though I'm doing a lot of talking, I'm hoping to learn from you guys as well when we get to the rest of the slides. We're nearly there. So that's that. Any other questions?
Yeah, just one follow-up question on this. So I've just pulled up a JD that I was looking at recently, and I put it into Excel how many criteria there are, and there's 75 roughly.
Wow. Okay. That is.
Now, obviously, that's quite a lot. So I guess you'd probably look to how would you give a piece of evidence that could cover 2 or 3 going on down, or even the first 5, let's say, and then the next 5. Is that a useful approach?
Well, yeah, I think so. If you've got 75 essential or desirable criteria, what we could do is, because again, as I said at the start, a lot of these job descriptions are written quite generically, and it's not a true reflection of what you do, it's just indicative. So when you've spoken to, when you've seen spoken to the line manager, the recruiting manager, and look at the job advert, that will give you a really good idea what the key essential important bits are of the job description, person spec, and focus on those. So you might have, of the 75, you might have, I don't know, 6 broad headings. You think, you know what I'll do? I can't 75 individual examples. I'll use 6 broad examples against those areas, as long as you kind of broadly cover all the subcomponents. That makes any sense. So you might have, I don't know, communication skills or managing conflicting deadlines. So you can build that fit that into your example and say, this is how I engage with stakeholders on this basis. I just sell a product for them and convince them to join us on the journey, or I manage conflicting deadlines on this basis on the same project. So you might have to extrapolate that example to cover all the little bits.
Well, that's great. So then you would use your examples, you'd structure them in a similar order to the essential and desirable stuff going down, but then group it sensibly.
Yeah,
there's 6 examples, so you wouldn't want to jump in between. So like one from the top, one from bottom, middle, etc. Okay.
But do you know what? What's happened? One of my colleagues he inquired about this recently. So look, if you've given an example, and it will happen, if you give an example about a criterion earlier on, and then while you're navigating through it, thought, oh, you know what? I can use that example. The same example I used earlier, because it covers that bit as well. So all I've said is this has been covered above, or something like that, if you feel, and then they can just go back up and have a look, because you don't necessarily need to, again, try to avoid repeating yourself. So
great, thank you.
I'm just reading Laura's some applications. Well, Laura, that again, that's a red flag for me. If they can't get their ducks lined up, that would be unsettling for me. So that speaks volumes, because they said they can't get the documentation, they're going to attract the wrong people for the role. So if they've got 3 documents with different, I mean, I've seen job descriptions with the wrong job title in them. That have been quite, so I've reached out, or the job description with the comments written in by people who are recruiting, and they've put out external adverts. So even though I didn't apply for them, I reached out to the recruiting manager. You need to remove the comments in there. They've got personal comments in there. So yeah, lots to be said about that.
Sorry, just to add to that as well, I didn't end up applying for that role, but it kind of gives you the feeling that if they can't be bothered to put a decent application together, what does that show in their management style and how they treat their staff development and everything else later on?
Yeah, absolutely. So, and again, I said it's a two-way street. You have to decide whether it's right. And again, you're assessing whether it's the right team to work with, and you've already got an idea. Well, actually, there's some dysfunctions going on here. Yeah, Helen, agree. Assignment brief, yeah, which gives you shortlist criteria. Absolutely, yeah, that's helpful. The red flag around agenda for change bandings, absolutely. There's a clear grade disparity across NHS, certainly since the transition. I don't know if there's going to be a wholesale review of our job descriptions, and then I'm not sure it'll happen anytime soon. And so without insulting people, I'd come across people I liaise with, and I didn't realize until later that they're a much higher band, and I thought, well, I'm not explaining to them the role. They should explain to me as well. And I find it unsettling that. So, well, I've got a lot of insights and knowledge about this area, and they were not my line managers, but other people from a different team. So why am I sort of guiding them? It should be the other way around. So what that's given me some confidence. So look, this sounds a bit cruel, but if they can work at that level, that's then boosted my confidence to apply for roles at that level as well. So, as I said before, we do some amazing things, but we just don't have some self-awareness of it. And that's why it's important to document all that. So I'm just reading Lynn's. Yeah, sometimes that's the case, Lynn, unfortunately. I can't say much about the job description. To be fair, my job description that I got cited upon when I first started at HE, when HE was still very much in its embryonic stages. It was about 6 months down the line, and the job description, believe it or not, it said project manager, and I wasn't a project manager. And a lot of the job titles were project managers, and it wasn't the case. And they're written in a generic sense, so I had to tease a lot of that out at the when I had a meeting with the recruiting manager, and also looking at the job advert and an interview. And I was quite relieved that, in fact, about a year or two down the line, the job description bore no resemblance to what I did in the role itself. So it will evolve. That's why, unfortunately, it's a double-edged sword. You have to provide the evidence against the person spec and what's in the job description, but it might not be exactly what you need to do. That's why the conversation with the recruiting manager and the job advert has a better indication of what the requirements are for the role. Okay. Yeah. We've all been through that, Lynn, unfortunately, or most of us. Shall we move to the next slide, please? So some do's and don'ts. Again, apologize. Some of these are really, really obvious. I said keep the supporting information section relevant. Ask yourself, is this absolutely essential for the role? So the example I'll give you is people, somebody said, actually, that's under the other one, do not sign, but someone's put, well, I speak German to recruit doctors from Europe. Well, you may well do that, but it's not a requirement of your job, so why have you included it in there? And so think about what's actually necessary for the role. You've got a capacity of 1,500 words. This is your unique chance to sell yourself. So, and also, if you can get your message across, or is it car now? Is it, yeah, okay, yeah, brilliant, thank you. That's helpful to know. If you can get your message across in less than 1,500 words, absolutely fine. We just have to avoid waffle. Can I just ask people, if you can put this in the chat, how long do you think? I know we're not talking about CVs, we're talking about job application, and we have to do it more objectively with evidence-based if we have to shortlist people. But just, can you put in the chat, how long do you think it takes for a recruiting manager to spend, how much time do you think they're spending on a CV to decide whether they're going to shortlist or not? You're going to stick in the chat. Well, Lynn, you might be laughing at Gufar, I might pronounce it properly. 10 seconds is the average. That's all it is. People just look at it. Yeah, that's it. On a CV, not the job application, CV, that's all. So it has to be impactful, direct, and they get 70, 80 easily, and they haven't got the time or the inclination. 10 seconds. So with CVs in particular at the start, they have a, I don't know, call it personal profile, and say, I don't know, 15 years project manager, senior project manager, delivered ITIL qualified, Lean Sigma 6, whatever it is, bullet points, and that draws attention to it. And this thing about achievements, what you've delivered, what achievements are, your unique selling point, just quick bullet points, and then they'll start you doing the rest of it. 10 seconds, all it takes. Absolutely staggering. That's why it's important, and keep the message short, concise, direct, avoid waffle, get into habit of writing, explain things in a few words as possible. Again, as I said, give the reader a few needles instead of a haystack. And as mentioned earlier, the example I've used in the past, again, in every instance for the support information bit and evidence it against the person spec, definitely give a specific example. On the next slide, I'll explain in a minute what we shouldn't do. But again, for the car model, I mentioned earlier about automating Microsoft Excel. Why I did it? So what a challenge. So I was dealing with 70 queries each month, and every query will take 10 or 15 minutes. So after about 3 or 5 attempts, I got bored. So I automated it. That was my action. And the result was I was able to produce reports in 2 hours instead of 3 days, and adopt more responsibility, assume more responsibility, and also put the code in my work colleagues' computers as well, and then that freed up some of their time. They got more involved in more investigative analytical work as well. That saved time, improved accuracy and quality, and it allows others to complete their activity without any prior expertise. Sorry, Julie, I wasn't talking about job applications. I'm just talking about generally on CVs. I know we're not talking about CVs, but I'm just saying that we really, really need to be as concise as possible. I think as in NHS rules are that they have to look for evidence, because the applicants can challenge that back and say, look, you've rejected me, but I've got clear evidence on here. So yeah, it needs to be done objectively. And the scoring criteria in the past had to be recorded on a system online on NHS jobs. I don't know if Track does that. I don't know if Track does that anymore, but on NHS jobs, we have to say, well, no relevant direct experience, no relevant direct qualifications, here and the examples and stuff. Oh, brilliant. Okay, that's helpful. So there you go. We need to provide evidence on that. So I use that as an example. And so that's a car model. Again, I've talked about show your passion and determination for the job. And if you can bring that out, hopefully you'll bring that out interview. If you can bring that out quickly in the application as well, definitely do that. So other things, definitely. So I'm running out of time, so I'll be quick. So about proofreading, make sure, I guarantee you, once you've done it and you think, all right, it's done now, visit it the next day, you'll find something else. You'll find some grammatical inconsistencies and spelling mistakes. Absolutely. Yeah, definitely. Get someone to read it. Avoid jargon. If you're using, I don't know, SQL, write it in structured query language. Or if you, I don't know, APM. I'm hoping people know what APM means, but not necessarily the case. I'd say do read any policies written by that team, any board papers. You're working in the environment, so reach out to people. So should be an example of some of the reports that you produced recently, so you can weave that into the interview. So if no other questions on this, can we move to the next slide, please?
Helen has got her hand up.
Oh, sorry, Helen.
So do they look at the CV part first over the supporting information? And if they're getting 30 to 40 potential applications, do you think then that they are rejecting people at shortlist based on what they're seeing on the CV? So my CV is quite short and succinct, but it gives a lot more information, and my experience matches the criteria in the supporting information. It doesn't, what I use my CV part for is more about what I can bring in, what I do or have brought to each role outside of that supporting criteria. So I'm asking that question because I'm at over 50 applications since the recruitment opened up in NHS, and I've had one interview. So it's 98% are going through for shortlisting to the manager. So is that a potential barrier, that they're not liking what they're seeing in that CV part that's bulleted because it's not necessarily the criteria that they're asking for, because that is in my supporting information?
So by CV, do you mean your employment history?
Yeah.
Okay, so right. No, I would. Can I just check? So I know in the NHS we use job applications, but when people talk about CVs, they're talking about qualifications and employment history. Essentially, that's the main bit. That's what people refer to CV in this instance. Okay.
Yeah. So Track has all of that information, doesn't it? It has. I have CV, and then my CV is into Track in the employment history and all of that, and qualifications. So are they seeing that before the supporting information? Are they only looking at that for 10 seconds or whatever, and not seeing what they're expecting to see in terms of essential criteria? So therefore you're not getting shortlisted, and they're not really looking at your supporting information, which is the 1,500 worded statement, which is what I use to match to the supporting information.
So when I talk about CVs, I guess, yeah, Jen, I agree, that should never happen. They should look at the entire evidence and the entire document. When I'm talking about CVs, I'm talking about, in the private sector, for instance, the people emailed CVs as a Word file, a 2-page file, and that's my CV, and they look at it and disregard it. In NHS recruitment, they have to look for evidence and provide clear reasoning and rationale as to why they're shortlisting and not shortlisting people. So what we can do, we can reach out, stay on the line. Sorry, I'm overrunning a little bit, but if people want to stay on, I'm happy to have a chat. But yeah, they should not be doing that. They should look at the entire document.
I just looked at Track, and when you do you can manage application, you can download the application. It shows you the orders, like your personal details. Then if you've got any offences, and then it kind of goes in straight into personal statement before it gets into your experience. So that's obviously they've done that in an order, haven't they? So the personal statement is probably what they're looking at first.
Okay, thank you. That's good to know, because I don't do that side. I don't do the cruising side. So yeah,
I think you just can go in there and your past applications. You can just put download your application. You can see the order it's in.
Right. Okay. Thank you.
Brilliant. Shall we move on to the next slide? Just running over a little bit. I'm happy to stay on if people want to do that. If you need to go, by all means do that. But the slides will be shared. So people say some wonderful. The example I'll give you is like you might say you shouldn't say this. I pay great attention to detail, and then the application riddled with spelling mistakes. So we need to be careful about that. But instead of like this, I'm a great communicator. So look, what have you done to communicate? How have you been articulate enough, and how did you persuade people? And so again, give a specific example using the car model. Avoid repetition if you can. You can use the same example for different things, or you can say, as above. So we're running out of space. You know, the reason why I said use short sentences, we talked about, you know, the reduction in attention span, keep it concise to get a message across. Remember I talked about earlier about jargon, complex terminology. You may need to explain that. Anything irrelevant should be disregarded. You know, I'm a stickler for the next one. You know, I'm sure you're all wonderful people, but you know, if somebody posts something controversial on social media when you're shortlisted, you might get researched by the recruiting manager. I do that, by the way. Call me a sadist. And remember, you know, we're here to ultimately we're here to serve the bottom line. So think about, you know, ask yourself at each stage what you do in terms of examples and how that has led to improvements in patient care, even it might be a bit indirect. Any questions on that one? Shall we move to the next slide, please? Yeah, pleased to know we're nearly done. So I'll be really quick on the last couple of slides. So there are some really helpful links here. The one I want to draw your attention to more than anything is the Agenda for Change Evaluation Handbook and the National Job Profiles. If you've not seen these, it's really important you do go into those, because that tells you what the differences are between the roles. So from assistant project manager to a project manager to a program manager or a senior project manager, and what the distinct differences are in terms of job requirements and the skills and knowledge. Things like that is really important. That's how they're graded. So there are national profiles for a range of professions, and the job evaluation handbook. So give an example. So communication, there are 16 factors for agenda for change, and in communication it goes to 6. A lot of them go to 5 or 6 or 7 levels. So the bottom level for communication. Oh, that's interesting. Yeah, that's Mina. Yeah, that is quite concerning. But hopefully there won't be any inconsistencies between that and the application. But yeah, so the communication at the basic level will be I communicate with people at the most fundamental level with my team members, and that is it. At the highest level, somebody may need to communicate to quite an antagonistic audience. For instance, a director of services may end up informing the community that they're going to close down a mental health hospital because of lack of resources and it's urgently needed, and that can be quite troublesome for a lot of people trying to convey that message and the reason why and all the rest of it. So at different levels, and definitely avail yourself to those as well. We talked about leadership courses to advance people. That I think there's some links in here about the training courses that help you grow into leadership roles as well. And there are other courses here. Massive online open course, edX. They're free websites where the courses are run by people who are PhD students at, you know, Oxford, Berkeley, you know, Harvard, really recognized, and short courses, and you can study at your own pace. And you get a certificate which you have to pay for £30 or £50, whatever it is, but you can put that down as well and read this. Obviously discounted courses as well, heavily discounted. So if there are skills gaps, if there are skills gaps and you want to move to a different role, there are courses you can undertake. And I talked about secondments and asking your manager, all that kind of stuff. But all these learning things definitely need to speak to your manager and put them in your PDP, and that will have to support. They'll have to support your development. So these things do actually certainly that agenda for change. It'll draw the distinction between the assistant project manager to the senior project manager, and the terminology that's used at the senior level. Weave that into your application, and the readers, oh wow, that's right. Instead of supporting a document, this person helping deliver the policy of the team, and you may well be doing it, but you're not wording it as such. So that's really interesting. So they're helping write the policy, which you are, but you don't write it that way. So you're already operating and thinking at a higher level. So when you apply for the role, think, well, I'm already thinking ahead of the game. So those are courses there. So definitely consider yourself a speak to your manager about embarking on training. If you want to move to a different field, add that into your appraisal and your PDP. That way they'll have to support that. So shall we quickly move to the next slide? We're just running over a little bit. So yeah, this is it. When you do search for roles, remote working might well be an option, but if you're employed by NHS England, you can request to keep your office base. It's not fine, absolutely fine. I would suggest, I'm not following that through, but do download and save down the job description, your application, the personal spec, and also don't forget the job advert because it'll disappear. So make sure you grab it at Summit, save it down. You might need those for interview. Again, by being bold and indispensable, I'm thinking about, okay, sell yourself, market yourself really well, confidently, use your unique selling point, your achievements and your successes. And again, your application should contain as much evidence as possible against the criteria. I said before, it's a two-way street. You may decide that you don't want to work for the employer, which is absolutely fine. And so I said before, do speak to your line manager and see if you get any sort of participation in any recruitment panels, so you can see how things work from the other side. And definitely, so yeah, so we are now at any Q&A, and I've got some answers for some of the general questions people have raised. So what I'll do, people might have some specific questions, and I can talk about the other ones that Antonia shared. I might have covered a lot of them, to be fair. Are there any other questions at this stage? Okay, so whilst the questions are coming through, or people are thinking about the questions, I just want to address some things that I know Antonia mentioned, that people sometimes are frustrated by repeated rejections, and they want some broader understanding, broader guidance. So again, one thing, I don't know whether the rejections. Oh yeah, sorry, thank you, Jane. I'll address that next. So I'm not sure whether the rejections are taken place at application level. I think colleagues said it was application level earlier. So if you want to stay on the line, I'm happy to do that. Again, hopefully there's some helpful advice in the session today that, if you're evidence-based against each of the criterion, hopefully, a recruiting manager should not really reject it, because they think they meet the criteria or exceeded it. And so, by definition, they should be shortlisting for the interview at least. I will be running a session on the 30th of October on how to win at interviews. Hopefully, if you found this helpful, by all means, attend that session as well. Antonia will be in touch regarding that.